there's been some big developments from a lot of the big traditional SaaS providers trying to figure out how on earth do they, I guess, survive, pivot, become kind of like orchestrators in the new AI world, right? Where just like, it's just everything's getting disrupted. And we've got some of those big players like that we want to talk about today. SAP, a former employer. For you, Thomas, we're going to talk about ServiceNow, Salesforce. It's obviously one of the big ones for the sales community. And then NVIDIA like threads through and underneath all of these. So yeah, I thought it'd be really interesting to look at how those traditional players have made some moves, created a new strategy to handle the AI era. But yeah, what's just summary, Thomas, and then I'll let you drive where we go first. What's your perspective, please?
Yeah, no, this is a super interesting subject. Although, of course, everybody knows Anthropic is catching the headlines at the moment. Nevertheless, we said in one of our previous episodes that 2026 is the year of inference. And of course, that requires to take a look at where are the leading SaaS providers, because they all focus on inference. One thing is clear, right? None of them is creating their own large language model. They expect that to be commoditized by the big players that we know of, and they focus with their strategy solely on the inference side. And of course, it's now interesting to take a look. Is this really the year of inference? We are halfway through it, or almost halfway. Or is it still lacking a little bit behind? Everybody can draw their own conclusions. I have my own as well. And then for the setup of this episode, we agreed you take a closer look at Salesforce. And I took a closer look at SAP and ServiceNow, where they are, and see if we can bring that together and come to a conclusion. Is this really mature enough? Is this really living up to what we call the year of inference?
Yeah, so from an enterprise point of view, Thomas, like inference, we all know now that the model that we're using on our phone, on our desktop, it's been trained. And the brain power behind the large language model is feeding into lots of other software companies, right? They're all using one of the big frontier models as their brain power. I think most people get that, like, yeah, okay, so when I'm using it personally, I ask it a question, and when it starts talking to me, it's moved into its inferencing mode. Indeed, when a Waymo or a AI-powered autonomous vehicle is driving, it's inferencing, and in that case, the inference is taking place at the edge. When you use that term, is this the year of inference? What does that mean from your kind of enterprise perspective, Thomas?
Yeah. So when you and I and most people who use ChatGPT or Claude or anything else, when they use those models, yes, that's called inference, but that's still from a consumer perspective, right? I use it every day. You use it every day for stuff that's not necessarily in the business context. Although, I mean, when I say that, I mean, yes, it is in the business context, but not with the business data in the background. Where it gets really interesting is when you put that all into real business context with real business data. And I remember we talked in one of our episodes about the difference between deterministic and non-deterministic, which is still a big problem, right? That problem has not been solved. If you use an AI layer in a true business context, you need to make sure that you get the same results every single time, and they need to be accurate. You can't have a model that hallucinates. You can't have different versions of results in a business context, in an accounting context, or in finance context. That's just not a thing. So this is still, I mean, I'm saying that up front, this is still a struggle with the SaaS providers and in our industry. How that's been solved, I guess we have to wait for that, right? Of course, there's Mira's company tackling that head on, but you can't afford any mistakes, or you can't afford different results in the business context. That's very, very clear.
Yeah, but nonetheless, like if you go to, and hopefully we've got Salesforce coming on the podcast in the next few weeks. So I was at Salesforce Tower in London about 3 weeks ago, meeting some good friends that work in senior roles at Salesforce. And yeah, I think it's just fair to say that Salesforce now, if we start there, it is Agentforce. That is the giant push and for them, it's around interface into their customers' Salesforce instance, right? But it's not just that. It's also like, well, okay, Agentforce also has an external view of the world. It's got the ability to go externally as well. And in the most simplistic terms, it can, help you draft reach outs and outreach stuff and all of that. But they're also giving their customers the ability to then sort of build on top of their platform, customer services bots and leveraging generative AI as well as AI that can kind of take the pain. And it's not Salesforce's fault, but it is painful using CRM systems in sales. We've done that for many, many years. And so I thought Mark Benioff, the way that he's approached this has been very open. They've released their I think they call it headless Salesforce, where your AI agent in your company can go and interact with the Salesforce data. You don't log into SFDC anymore. And so I think they've been very forward thinking. And Mark Benioff, go onto YouTube if you have time, go listen to his latest kind of on stage, kind of fireside chats. He's been very open about it. I've been impressed, actually. I've learned a lot from the guy, and he's got this giant oil tanker that is this huge global, most popular CRM platform in the world. And they are moving it very, very quickly to have this kind of like agentic feel to it that you can then go build on. It's profound how fast that has happened, right? I mean, when did Agentforce come out? What, less than a year ago? People are still experimenting with it, right?
Yeah, so one thing is clear, no matter if it's Mark Benioff or Christian Klein from SAP or Bill McDermott from ServiceNow, they don't utter a single sentence without mentioning AI these days. They have to. And they all have a little bit of a different approach, right? I mean, SAP is clearly betting the house also on their own AI agentic framework called Joule, with the argument that they are sitting on the most valuable business data, which is back in the ERP system. That's their world, versus Salesforce more coming from a external customer view and those kind of data sets. And then ServiceNow is clearly focusing on what they call, their AI layer is called Now Assist. They are clearly looking at workflow orchestration across the enterprise. So on the one hand, you can argue they all have their own strategy, their own pillars of the strategy, and don't necessarily overlap with each other or touch each other. I'm not sure if that's really the case, but I think where the battleground is on the AI layer, on the user experience layer itself. Reminds me of the big old portal base back in the days when IBM and Plumtree and Oracle and SAP all were battling about who has the leading user interface, and that was called the portals. I think we are going into a similar direction, right? ServiceNow wants to be the overarching orchestration layer. SAP is trying to position its AI layer, and then of course you have ChatGPT and Anthropic and X, everybody coming in with their user experience as well. And that has not been decided. Who's taking the lead on the user experience at the end of the day? Of course, ChatGPT or OpenAI wants to be the leading user experience with SAP data underneath. But at the same time, SAP wants to have that complete stack under control as well. So this is very interesting to watch what happens on that sense. But from an outside perspective, yes, there's SAP with their Joule strategy that sits on 3 pillars: the AI layer itself, the agents under SAP Joule, and they released an army of different agents recently at their Sapphire event. And then, of course, the data layer itself comes with some caveats, because many strategists believe that the marketing is way ahead of the execution itself. But I guess that's normal, right? I mean, we've seen that before. That's not necessarily a surprise. When you look at the leading use cases from SAP on the marketing side, many of them are on the HR side, which are still the low-hanging fruits, right? I would be much interested to see the use cases on the accounting side, on the supply chain, on inventory management, where agents work with each other. And then the question is, of course, where's the human coming in, right? Is the human only there for rubber stamping the results? Right. And then they released, what did they call? I have the workflow insights or Joule work. They released something called Joule work, which is another army of AI agents. And then people now, I saw some LinkedIn posts are questioning, where's the human in this? And what if the agent said that this specific personnel or employee is obsolete, right? How does that work in a bigger context? So this is still and the same on the ServiceNow side, right? HR as the leading use cases, low-hanging fruits. But then when you look deeper and you want to see some real testimonials, they are not there yet. So I guess the marketing clearly on both ends, and maybe also for Salesforce, is ahead of the execution side. And customers are careful. First of all, customers are careful because they have to deal with many other problems, specifically on the SAP side. Many of them are still on-premise. And SAP Joule is clearly positioned to be only for cloud-based customers at this point. So they are waiting for the migration first. And then it's still not 100% clear how it's expensive as well, based on the current price tag and the ROI on both ends. And I guess you would include Salesforce in that as well. The ROI is still questionable. It's not clear. It's not clear cut.
Do you know what? I think so. There's two major issues or components to this, isn't there? Is now all Claude wants to be the single pane of glass for the user within an enterprise. That's its goals. If you look at, I've been using Claude Cowork just extensively, just so far ahead for enterprise. And it's got all of the APIs you could wish for. So look at your stack, whatever other software you have in your business, this thing's got an API into it, right? Then you've got the fight back. And so they want to be the orchestration layer. Then you've got, say, Salesforce. One of the most kind of enlightening things I heard Mark Benioff say was that he wasn't sure what really was the big purpose when they bought Slack. So Salesforce owns Slack, right? But he said one of his new hires, I can't remember who it is, I can't credit for the guy, but one of his new hires was like, no, you need to buy Slack because that's where the attention is of all of your users. And that's where you want your AI agents, is to live in Slack. Because the user, I just want to be in Slack. Why would I have to leave Slack, go log into something else to do something? Why can't I just tell the agent in Slack to do that? And so that's sort of my window now into all of my enterprise technology is the Claude or ChatGPT window that we're all used to. Is what's the lowest friction way of me being able to engage with my enterprise apps? Where can I do most? And then you've got Microsoft in all of this with Copilot, and Copilot's getting very, very good. And so all of these agents have got the ability to inward look to data to a certain extent before it hits a guardrail or where there's no API available. And then a lot of them have the ability to build an agent on top of them. So I've been using Copilot Studio. I can build an agent in Copilot Studio. And then you've got the big players all of a sudden kind of coming in the rearview mirror, the SAPs and ServiceNows of this world, who SAP seem to be the furthest behind. That could be unfair, but that's what it looks like to me, or what it feels like. All wanting to then take the orchestration layer. So it's like, no, you can have all these different things in your business, but let us be the orchestration layer for you. And how that then plays into deterministic versus non-deterministic answers and security and KYC, know your customer, all of that plays back into this. It gets very complicated, doesn't it? If it wasn't already complicated enough with a enterprise stack, and then you just mentioned cloud versus on-prem, yeah, wow. Go sort that one out. Not easy.
Yeah. It's actually, if you ask questions like, show me all your suppliers with late deliveries. Why did inventory costs increase in the last quarter? Create a job requisition for a senior engineer. Draft a response for a procurement dispute. Show me what I need to do when the Strait of Hormuz is still closed in terms of inventory reconciliation. Where do you ask these kind of questions, right? Until now, these were all pre-configured sets in your existing UI. Now that you can use normal human language, you still need that unique control plane, as you call it, or AI control tower, where you use your language to ask exactly these kind of questions, because this is not pre-configured user interface anymore. This is now full. So where's your entry point? Slack, of course, hurts me when you say Slack, because of my old startup where we tried exactly that for a long time.
Really?
We were just too early. Yeah. We were using Slack as the entry point for exactly these generic AI questions. We even won the worldwide hackathon at Salesforce back in the days. I think we were a touch too early. But since you mentioned Slack, right, this would be the right tool for across your entire enterprise. You're talking about workflow orchestration, which is what ServiceNow is using. Slack could be the ideal entry point for that. All kinds of questions that come to mind that you need for your daily job, and you just put them in free form, and it comes back with the results pre-formatted. And it's the same. We use ChatGPT today for consumer-based stuff, but I have not seen, and again, this is where the battleground is, I have not seen that consistently across the enterprises. And I'm sure that ChatGPT and Anthropic want to be that freeform and that Slack equivalent. But then you have Salesforce with Slack itself. Then you have SAP creating their own AI layer. I'm sure ServiceNow has something to say in that as well. I think that's where the battleground is at the moment.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And it's gonna keep being the battleground as well, because that piece around how many of my suppliers were late on their deliveries. What do I do? What happened last time the Strait of Hormuz closed? How do I mitigate that this time around? That needs to be a deterministic answer. It can't be wrong. And when I think about SAP and the data that lives within SAP, and SAP's kind of, for me, got itself a bad name when probably over 10 years ago now, it started selling finance and ERP systems to what I would regard as an inappropriate customer. So does BMW, global manufacturer, gets tons of values, and is SAP inappropriate for them as being a giant manufacturer with all these SKUs and supply chain dependencies? Yes. Is a local council in the north of England the right place for an SAP for ERP system? Not in my experience, no. And so SAP is just so tightly controlled, isn't it? It's never you never bought SAP for the user friendliness, did you? You bought it for that. You can explain it a lot better than I can, but you know what I mean? It's not like a happy to use platform.
I guess I was dealing with that kind of problem for more than 20 years at SAP. And yes,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
but in our defense, I say our now, but in SAP's defense, things got wrong when customers introduced an SAP, an ERP system, and every enterprise needs an enterprise resource planning system, right? There's no way around that. You can survive on simply having a CRM system and then don't have an order entry. If a customer wants to buy, you need ERP for that. Every customer, every enterprise needs that. But the problem always came up when customers try to press the ERP system into their existing business processes. ERP works if you are able to adjust accordingly, if you are able to modify your processes and configure the system for your needs. That's when it works. It's still, I'm still a fan of ERP. There are not many customers or companies who try to tackle or compete on the ERP front. I guess there's only Oracle, SAP, and one or two smaller ones, because nobody wants to do complex software anymore. Salesforce, for that Fable system, they didn't even touch order entry. They don't want to. It's too complex. So they keep it on the simple side. But the other point I wanted to make is, because we talked about Slack, but AI is not only about asking questions and then getting an answer, right? That's, again, still low-hanging fruits. If you think about these agents now, they come with results and reasoning and conclusion. A sales agent, a sales AI agent proposes a new pricing structure for a specific customer or a specific customer segment. Supply chain agents validate inventory. Procurement agents source new suppliers. I mean, this is not just asking a question and getting an answer. This is a whole workflow that happens in the background. That's why I said before, we're still questionable. Where, at what point does the human come in and steer it? So SAP makes the argument, when we have all these agents working with each other, then we can release the human and have him or her focus on more strategy. Again, I still want to see these specific use cases where the human then sees the strategy rather than simply rubber stamping the results. So, I mean, this is still far-fetched future for now, because all we see is these low-hanging fruits. But if you do your financial closure at the end of the year on an agent-based work, and the human is just there to put the stamp on it and send it off, what if something is wrong? Who's accountable?
Yeah, no one's going to court and blaming their AI, right? That's not gonna. No, it was the same when it's one of the first episodes of the podcast, right? When I was looking at who is a really good example of an enterprise customer who's getting rid of SaaS providers to build their own software using generative AI. And I mentioned it before, it was Klarna, and Klarna announced pre-IPO, so all sorts of weird things go on pre-IPO, don't they? And they announced they were going to get rid of Salesforce and just they didn't need it, they would build their own software using AI. And then they didn't. And Mark Benioff at the time said, hey, where's their institutional memory going to come from? If they build, you sort of see the point. It's like if I said, I don't need my ERP system anymore, I'm going to build my own. If I'm running SAP, I might not like it, but that's my institutional memory for all of my finance, all of my supply chain. And that orchestrates a whole bunch of process. And the reason it's horrible to deal with is it's ones and zeros throughout that process. It's not at any point going, oh, let me use my creativity here to tell me whether that invoice number matches that purchase order. And then it's going to do that at a global scale. Everybody has to conform to the way that the ERP system is running. Same with SFDC. Everyone has to conform with the way the different fields in SFDC. You can tailor them, but that then becomes the way it's locked, and that becomes the way that you're doing things around here. It's not, oh, we'll just sort of change it on the fly. It has to be a process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, clearly that's what I have some quotes here from SAP leadership. Hold on, let me just look it up if I find it real quick. SAP says we have the enterprise's most valuable business data, so we can build the smartest business agents, according to what you're saying, right? So they completely focus on the business context and the data layer underneath. And a lot of their customers struggle to have clean data. That's why they are behind on the execution side as well, right? I mean, if they go with their AI agent framework to a customer, the prerequisite needs to be you have to have clean data, otherwise it doesn't work. And then ServiceNow comes and says we are sitting in the middle of the enterprise work and workflow orchestration, so we can coordinate humans, applications, and AI agents better than anyone else. So they are, again, workflow orchestration sitting across, don't necessarily have the data context and the data layers underneath. They rely on somebody else to do that, and they focus on the workflows. You might ask the question, right? Are these workflows, do they need to be pre-configured, or can that be done on the fly by a generic AI system or an agent framework? I would argue pretty soon, yes. And then the question is, of course, also where, because we talked about Jensen's keynote, NVIDIA keynote in our last episode, right? Where it was very clear he wants to move up the stack. How far does NVIDIA want to move up the stack? I'm not sure. They are not going into the direction of ServiceNow or SAP or Salesforce all the way. Jens has clearly said we need those systems and those software applications. But in terms of infrastructure and agent platform, they want to be clearly the layer underneath. And then begs the question is, where do they collide with what SAP wants to do, or ServiceNow wants to do, or Salesforce wants to do? SAP just made a big announcement with Anthropic, using Claude as their leading large language manufacturer, while still being agnostic to all the other large language models, right? I mean, SAP always played Switzerland in that.
Oh, right. Okay.
My old company, Aleph Alpha, German company, German AI flagship company at that point, even as a startup, we, of course, were hoping in our partnership, and SAP was an investor in our partnership with SAP, that we would be not necessarily the equal among equals, but have a preferred scenario, but that just did not happen. And that's also why Aleph Alpha is not doing as well as everybody is hoping for in Germany. Right or wrong, I mean, that's a question SAP needs to answer. But they want to be agnostic, and they are agnostic, although now with the announcement of Anthropic, it seems like they clearly have a preference towards Claude.
Yeah.
They use that as their leading large language model.
Yeah, gosh, it is a tricky time. So basically, if you're an enterprise customer, you are going to be looking at your existing SaaS stack that you are paying, in many, many cases, multiple millions of dollars per annum for, right? You're going to be having a look at that. You're going to be looking at what capability are they building for me. Then you're going to start looking at the token costs coming in. I can't remember who it was. It was sort of one company gave all of their employees access to Claude. In 1 month, the first token cost bill, the invoice came in $500,000.
Well, in American terms, $500 million. Yeah, $500 million. So
it was $500 million, was it? Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, 500 million. The word out there is, and I don't know if it's true or not, it was Amazon. But yeah.
Right. Okay. I didn't know that.
We went in the wrong direction. This whole tokenization industry that Jensen and NVIDIA is pushing now, right? Everything is based on tokens in the future. People are getting hired with a token budget, and have to use that token budget. This is one result that went the other way, and we'll see how that plays out in the near future. There needs to be a nice middle ground, right, between using tokens and still doing some real work without necessarily using up all your tokens all the time.
Yeah. So I think we just need to stay on top of it, keep having these conversations, looking at where the big market moves happen, and with which and how these giant SaaS companies are moving. Look, I remember the first podcast we ever did together, Thomas, there was no movement from those big SaaS providers at that point. Nothing. And so they're not known for moving quickly, right? Because the moat and the lock-in that they have with their customers, their customers aren't going anywhere. They've had that luxury for decades, right? Not so anymore. A lot of customers will be taking a look and can I exit from some of these providers? So all we can do is stay on top of it. We said we were going to, that's a really interesting conversation that we'll keep having. We said we were going to cover, we've had Mythos, since we even organized this podcast, we've had the whole Mythos fiasco, which I think is highly political, actually. So, and indeed, I was using the downgraded Mythos Fable 5 model from Claude when I was over in San Jose. I was sat there happily using it. By the time I landed back in London, it had been banned. And I don't think helped by all the talk of this thing's going to eliminate jobs. Mythos can take down all the cybersecurity. Not really helped by that sort of language either.
So this is fascinating just to watch what's going on there. So before I say something about Mythos, just to summarize what we talked about, ServiceNow and Salesforce and NVIDIA and SAP, I think for now, the battleground is set, right? NVIDIA supplies the agent runtime and the agent infrastructure. OpenAI want to come in with reasoning and maybe more, maybe even the user experience, but certainly for the reasoning part, SAP clearly positions itself as supplying the business data, the business context, and that's where their strength is. They can do that better than anybody else. ServiceNow coming in with the workflows and the workflow orchestration, and Salesforce with the customer data and the customer external facing side. That's where everything is set. Oracle, of course, is among them as well. We shouldn't forget Oracle in all of this. And everybody is pulling a little bit on the fringes, trying to get more. But that's the way it's set in the context of the big SaaS providers, the way I see it for now. Now, talking about Anthropic, Mythos came out. It didn't come out, actually, because Anthropic people early understood how powerful Mythos is as a language model and what it can do to basically break into every software security system that there is. So instead of releasing it, they basically banded together and invited 6 or 7 of the biggest software companies, US companies, I have to say. I have not seen a European company or any other company being invited to the table to basically work with them on fixing these security flaws, right? And instead, they released Fable 5 with some guardrails that they put into Mythos. So Fable 5 is basically Mythos with guardrails. And what happens then is somebody jailbroke it, removed the guardrails, informed Anthropic, shut it down, and gave, I think there's the story that they gave Anthropic a few hours to completely shut it down, not only for external users outside of the US, but for US users as well, because Anthropic basically argued we can't distinguish between who's a US user and who's an outside user. So complete shutdown. And many people now argue this is now the first time that the US government is using a large language model as basically they say as a weapon.
So my Fable 5 was no longer available to me, the Claude user, when I got back to London after my trip. I used it for about 3 days and then it was gone. And I just think it's going to get highly political now with every single one of these releases. Then you've got ChatGPT, or OpenAI, rather, parent company of ChatGPT, and Anthropic coming out to IPO. And as I referenced with Klarna, all sorts of, we just had it with SpaceX, all sorts of crazy stuff happens before IPOs. They're desperately trying to say, we're ahead of the pack, invest with us, there's finite amount of money to invest in all these IPOs. So I think you're going to see more craziness as we progress. What does Fable 5 using it as a downgraded version of Mythos? Did I go, wow, this is compared to my regular Claude Opus, or using, I don't know, 5.5 or any of them? Did I notice this astounding difference? No. Just as like a general purpose, non-power user, I didn't notice any particular difference, but I think it's all about use cases for those models, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. But the bigger implications is, based on that example that we just described, what does that mean mid and long term for the entire industry, right? I mean, if they make regulations, if they write regulations in real time, unpredictable, what does that mean for the industry, right? Well, who can rely on what if the rules change overnight with no grace period in this case, right? What does that mean for Europe? You're sitting in Europe. What does that mean for Europe? Can you even work with one of these models freely? Can you trust them? Can you rely on them? For me, that's the scary part. And again, and I'm pounding on that every time we meet, is another wake-up call for Europe. And in this case, the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's just, then something needs to happen. Europe needs to come up with, I don't know, with something. Of course, open source would be the one that everybody points to, but you can rely on using US models if you are a European company, because of what just happened with Anthropic. And by the way, I'm not sure if I should take these voices serious. Many of them are on LinkedIn, and there are more and more basically recommending Anthropic to move their headquarters to Europe. I mean,
really? Well, they should.
Yeah.
Well, they should.
You should look at that. They said, if you're Anthropic, screw them. Move your headquarters to Europe. Start all over again as a European company. Huge market, nothing equivalent. Is that, I don't know if that's a solution, but if you look at social media and LinkedIn, there are a lot of people raising that point now. I have to say, I'm so relieved that I'm looking at this without being an insider or having my money in some of these companies, and just watching from the outside what happens, right? You have new headlines every day. The Inference space is fascinating to watch, see who will be successful, see who will not be successful, and maybe even disappear. That's still the big question. To what extent can a ServiceNow, can a Salesforce survive on the long term with AI coming in, or even SAP? That's fascinating to watch. And then, of course, on the training side, when I say that, on the large language model side, which slowly but surely becomes commoditized now, we know who the handful of big players are. That will not change overnight anymore. They are set. Nobody can afford a large language model with a lot of money in the bank. Europe completely gave up on developing any large language models now. They are relying on either, in this case, US, maybe even China. They have the open source solution that they are not fully embracing today, in my opinion. Super fascinating to watch this entire space, but I'm more than happy to watch it from the outside without being completely consumed by it.
Yeah, it's going to be wild. It's going to keep being wild. Look, what we'll do, the commitment on this podcast is we keep following it for you, helping you make sense of it and understand where things are at, particularly with enterprise adoption, but it all interlinks, doesn't it? So Thomas, brilliant conversation. I know we've got a hard stop there. So thank you very much for that. And I look forward to the next podcast with you, my friend. Thank you very much for joining again.
Thanks, Ben. Always a pleasure. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.